We turn now to Claude Gatebuke, a Rwandan genocide survivor. He works as the executive director of the African Great Lakes Action Network, and he joins us from Phoenix, Arizona, where he's participating in events there to commemorate the genocide. Thank you, Claude, so much for being here with us. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You were born and raised in Rwanda and witnessed some portion of this genocide. Can you take us back 20 years ago before you escaped the country and tell me what life was like for you then?
Prior to the genocide, prior to 1990, before Rwanda was invaded, it was a totally safe country. I actually had no clue that there were Rwandans who were excluded from living in Rwanda. And when Rwanda was invaded by those Rwandans who had been exiled for 30 years, it was a total surprise to me. I was only 10 at the time. So then a war ensued that was very violent, and a lot of atrocities were committed by the rebels who were invading the country from the north of the country with the help of the Ugandan military. And a lot of people fled to the city that I lived in, Kigali, in central Rwanda, where then I started being exposed to some of the things that were happening, where people were being called to meetings and being bombed by these rebels, and those who survived were killed with hand weapons. And a lot of the survivors of that carnage were very destitute, and they were not very well received or treated in the city. And then 4 years later, so that was a change, a major change, that war. And then 4 years after the war started in 1994, when the president's airplane was shot, we all knew that it was going to be total chaos in the country, because already leading up to it, there were almost daily riots of these political organizations that were fighting running battles. A lot of young people in the streets. When we went to school, we actually weren't sure that we would make it back home, and this is prior to the assassination of the president. And there had been a lot of other massacres. And so when the president was assassinated with the Burundian president, the whole country descended into terror and horror. And neighbors turned on each other. Extremist Hutus went after Tutsis. One of my neighbors, right next door, stood in front of his house and would hack people to death in front of everyone else in the neighborhood who were so afraid of this guy. He was armed to his teeth. And then
what did you
it
think? Let me
spread
jump
like
in
wildfire. And
I'm
yes.
sorry to interrupt you, but I want to just ask you a couple of follow-up questions of things you've already said. You were a teenager when this was taking place, and I don't want you to be graphic, but what did you understand about what was going on, and how much of what you saw then as a boy really has haunted you over these last 20 years?
At first, I was totally confused. It was like total chaos, everything crumbling around me, and I felt like it was the end of the world as a young boy, because the night that the president was shot, I started hearing shelling, and there were explosions from one end of the city, and they would whistle over our heads, and then quiet, and then boom, large sound. The stench, the place stunk of human flesh, blood mixed with the smell of gunpowder and all the smoke up in the air. And for me personally, I would shake for long periods of time, and my stomach would bubble, and I would pace back and forth, not knowing whether I wanted to go to the bathroom or come back and stay in my place and stay in my hiding place. And for 20 years living with it, it's been difficult. The nightmares recur. I can still hear the screams and cries of people who are crying for help. Wow. And that is also the reason why I stay engaged with preventing genocide and in an anti-genocide community, because once I lived here in the U.S. long enough and read the book of Frederick Douglass, I was inspired to do something to help. And at the time, there were a lot of atrocities taking place in the Congo that I knew that I could directly help with. And through storytelling and sharing my experience, I've been able to contribute to trying to end the conflict in the Congo. working with the organization African Great Lakes
Sure.
Action Network
Sure.
and the African Great Lakes Coalition that's also based here in the U.S., which is a coalition of a large number of organizations.
Very
I'm also
briefly,
involved in the
Claude, I'm sorry again to jump in. I just want to get to something before we have to let you go, and that is, you know, there seems to be mixed perspectives about the trajectory of the country now. I was just asking Daniel Bekele before I had the chance to talk to you about the conditions of the people in Rwanda. It seems to be doing well. Life expectancy has doubled. Women are in government. A million people have been lifted out of poverty. What are your continued concerns about the country as it is today?
The major concern is the lack of respect for human life and human rights and fundamental rights. People continue to be pursued inside and outside of the country for simply disagreeing with the government. A number of individuals have been assassinated, including on New Year's of this year, where a dissident colonel was killed in South Africa, and in many other places, including in London, Brussels, Nairobi, Kenya, a lot of places. And so being in Rwanda is almost like being in a prison because they have total control of you and can control your opinion.
Wow.
And if you dare express anything that is dissenting of the government, you can be killed, you get disappeared, or you go to jail. The other concerns are the invasions of the Congo. The Congo has lost almost 10 times as many people as we lost in the genocide in Rwanda. Over 6 million people have been killed, mostly by troops from Rwanda. Reports, like the UN mapping report that came out in October 2010, and the recent reports showing the involvement of the Rwandan government, not only in the killings and raping and recruiting of child soldiers, for which the US government finally withheld aid from Rwanda, and a bunch of other countries withheld their aid. And also the looting and taking of resources, illegal taking of resources from Congo. So those are my major concerns, and the lack of democracy, the lack of rights for the people to choose and decide who their leaders should be.
Very serious concerns indeed. Claude, I want to thank you so much for taking time with us and telling us some of your story. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And this is Arise America.